On August 6, 1945, the sky over Hiroshima was a distinct, brilliant blue. It was a Monday morning, and the city was alive with the routine of wartime life. Commuters boarded streetcars, students mobilized for demolition work, and soldiers ran drills. High above them, the drone of AB-29 Superfortress broke the silence, but few looked up in fear. A single plane rarely signaled a mass raid. Then, at exactly 8:15 a.m., the world tore apart. A blinding flash, brighter than 1,000 suns, erased the morning shadows, followed instantly by a silence so profound it felt like the earth itself had stopped breathing. In a fraction of a second, tens of thousands of lives were extinguished, and a city that had stood for centuries was reduced to ash and glass. But beyond the immediate horror, a sharper, more terrifying question emerged from the smoke. Had humanity just discovered the ultimate tool for peace, or had we engineered our own extinction? By the end of this journey, you will understand not only the chain of decisions that led to this cataclysm, but how that singular flash of light fundamentally rewrote the rules of power, politics, and survival for every human being on Earth. To understand the magnitude of that morning, we must look back to the quiet desperation that birthed the weapon. The road to Hiroshima did not begin in the Pacific, but in the chalk-dusted classrooms of Europe and the secret laboratories of the United States. Years before the Enola Gay took flight, scientists realized that the atom, the building block of all matter, held a secret. If you could split it, you could release energy on a scale previously reserved for the stars. Driven by the fear that Nazi Germany would harness this power first, the United States launched the Manhattan Project, a gamble of unprecedented cost and complexity. In the high desert of New Mexico, under the leadership of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the theoretical became physical. They were racing against time and physics, attempting to bottle the power of the universe into a metal casing. When the first test bomb detonated in July 1945, the sand turned to glass, and the observers knew the world had changed. The question was no longer could it be done, but should it be used? The war in Europe had ended, but in the Pacific, the conflict with Japan raged with ferocity that defied logic. President Harry S. Truman faced a grim calculus. An invasion of the Japanese mainland was projected to cost hundreds of thousands of American lives and millions of Japanese lives. The alternative was the bomb. It was a choice between a long, bloody siege or a sudden, devastating shock. The decision was made in secrecy, driven by the desire to end the war swiftly and perhaps to demonstrate this new American might to the watching Soviet Union. The target list was drawn, and Hiroshima, a city of military significance that had largely escaped conventional firebombing, was chosen. The stage was set for a mission that would bridge the gap between conventional wars of the past and the nuclear anxieties of the future. On the island of Tinian, deep in the Pacific, the B-29 bomber named Enola Gay roared down the runway in the early hours of August 6. The plane was overloaded, struggling to lift a 4.5-ton uranium bomb known as Little Boy. Pilot Paul Tibbets and his crew began the 6-hour flight to Japan in darkness. As they approached the target, the weather scouts reported clear skies over Hiroshima. The conditions were perfect for a visual drop. Inside the bomb bay sat a mechanism of terrifying simplicity, a gun-type device designed to fire a uranium projectile into a uranium target, creating a critical mass. As the crew donned their polarized goggles to protect their eyes from the coming flash, the city below continued its morning rhythm, unaware that it was in the crosshairs of history. At 31,000 feet, the bomb bay doors opened. When Little Boy fell, it took 43 seconds to drop to its detonation height of 1,900 feet. The explosion that followed was not a chemical reaction, but a nuclear one. Matter was converted directly into energy, creating a fireball that reached temperatures of millions of degrees hotter than the surface of the sun. Those closest to the hypocenter were vaporized instantly, leaving behind only nuclear shadows scorched on the stone steps and walls, eerie silhouettes of the final moment of a human life. The shock wave that followed leveled nearly every building within a mile radius, moving faster than the speed of sound. Glass shattered, steel twisted like licorice, and a massive mushroom cloud boiled 60,000 feet into the atmosphere. In an instant, the modern city of Hiroshima ceased to exist, replaced by a scorching hellscape of fire and ruin. For the survivors, known in Japan as a bakusha, the nightmare was just beginning. The initial blast was followed by a firestorm that consumed what little wood and paper remained. People wandered the streets in shock, their skin hanging in ribbons, desperate for water. But the water in the rivers was choked with debris and the dead. Then came the black rain, a sticky, radioactive precipitation that fell from the mushroom cloud, poisoning those who opened their mouths to drink it. They did not know what had hit them. Was it a new type of fuel? A massive cluster of bombs? The radiation, an invisible killer, began to attack their bodies from the inside, leading to a mysterious sickness that would claim thousands more lives in the weeks and months to follow. While Hiroshima absorbed the world's attention, a second team of airmen was preparing for a mission that history often treats as a footnote, but which was no less horrific. 3 days after Hiroshima, on August 9th, A.B. 29 named Boxcar took off carrying Fat Man, a plutonium implosion bomb that was far more complex and powerful than the uranium device dropped on Hiroshima. But the mission was plagued by near disaster from the start. A fuel pump failed, trapping hundreds of gallons of gas in the reserve tank, and the rendezvous with the escort planes was botched in bad weather. When Boxcar finally arrived over its primary target, the city of Kokura, they found it blanketed in smoke from a nearby firebombing raid. They made 3 passes, but the aim point remained obscured. With fuel running dangerously low, the pilot, Major Charles Sweeney, made the fateful decision to divert to the secondary target. That decision saved Kokura and doomed Nagasaki. Nagasaki was not an ideal target. It was built across several valleys which shielded parts of the city. However, when the clouds parted for a split second at 11:02 a.m., the bomb was released. This area was a heart of Japan's Catholic community, home to the largest cathedral in East Asia. When Fat Man detonated, it did so with a force of 21 kilotons. The geography that protected parts of the city also amplified the blast in the valley, creating a focusing effect that obliterated factories and neighborhoods alike. The tragedy of Nagasaki cemented the reality of the nuclear age. Hiroshima was not a one-time experiment. It was a reproducible method of destruction. Even after 2 atomic bombs and the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, the Japanese government remained paralyzed by indecision. The Big Six leaders of Supreme War Council were deadlocked, with military hardliners arguing that a glorious national suicide was preferable to unconditional surrender. It took the unprecedented intervention of Emperor Hirohito to break the stalemate. In a bunker deep beneath the imperial palace, he spoke the unthinkable. We must endure the unendurable. But the drama was not over. On the night of August 14th, a group of young military officers, refusing to accept defeat, launched a coup d'etat. They stormed the palace grounds, killed the commander of the Imperial Guard, and frantically searched the dark corridors for the vinyl recording of the Emperor's surrender speech, intending to destroy it before it could be broadcast. They failed to find the record. The next day at noon, radios across Japan crackled to life. For the vast majority of Japanese people, it was the first time they had ever heard the voice of the emperor. He spoke in an archaic, courtly dialect that many struggled to understand, never using the word surrender, but instead stating that the war situation had developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. He explicitly mentioned the new and most cruel bomb as a reason for ending the conflict to save human civilization. As the broadcast ended, people fell to their knees in the streets, weeping not just from grief, but from the overwhelming release of tension. The war was over, and the silence of peace finally returned to the skies. The aftermath of the bombing brought a transformation as radical as the destruction itself. When General Douglas MacArthur landed in Japan to lead the occupation, he became the de facto ruler of the nation and American shogun. But rather than exacting revenge, the occupation force set about rebuilding Japan in the image of a Western democracy. In a drafty ballroom in Tokyo, a small team of Americans secretly wrote a new constitution for Japan in just 1 week. This document, which the Japanese government was pressured to adopt, contained Article 9, a clause that famously renounced war as a sovereign right of a nation. This legal pacifism is perhaps the most unique legacy of Hiroshima. The city's destruction led directly to a nation that constitutionally forbade itself from possessing a military capable of offensive war. Hiroshima, therefore, is not just the site of a massacre. It is the pivot point where Japan turned away from the sword and toward the circuit board, rising from the nuclear ash to become an economic superpower. However, the occupation also brought a new kind of army to Hiroshima, an army of scientists. In 1947, the United States established the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission. Their mission was to study the long-term effects of radiation on the human body. They set up clinics on high ground, overlooking the ruins, and invited thousands of survivors to undergo rigorous examinations. But for the survivors, the scientific curiosity felt like a second victimization. The commission had a strict no-treatment policy. They were there to observe, not to heal. Survivors recall being treated like guinea pigs, their blood drawn, and their scars measured by the very nation that had inflicted the wounds, only to be sent home without medicine. It wasn't until years later that the Japanese government established its own medical laws to provide free health care for the victims. The physical reconstruction of Hiroshima is one of the greatest urban planning feats of the 20th century. In the late 1940s, the city passed the Hiroshima Peace Memorial City Construction Law. It was a bold declaration that Hiroshima would not just be rebuilt, but reimagined. Planners widened the streets to create fire breaks and raise the ground level using debris from ruins. But the most significant decision was what not to build. They set aside a massive swath of prime real estate in the city's center, the exact location of the busy Nakajima district that had been obliterated to remain empty forever. This became the Peace Memorial Park. In any other city, this land would be filled with skyscrapers and commerce. In Hiroshima, it is filled with air, trees, and silence. By prioritizing memory over profit, the city planners ensured that future generations could literally walk through the void left by the bomb. While Hiroshima rebuilt, the shockwave of the bomb continued to ripple through the corridors of power in Washington, Moscow, and London. The monopoly on nuclear power that the United States held was fleeting. In 1949, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, shattering American confidence and signaling the start of the Cold War's most dangerous phase. The logic of Hiroshima that one bomb could end a war evolved into a darker strategy known as mutually assured destruction. The terror that began on that August morning permeated the culture of the entire world. In the United States, school children practiced duck and cover drills. Presidents and premiers look back at the photos of 1945 not as a military victory, but as a prophecy of what would happen to their own cities if they made a single miscalculation. The bomb had ironically become a keep of the peace, a sword of Damocles hanging over humanity, forcing enemies to freeze rather than fight. While the geopolitics of the Cold War played out in closed rooms, the true legacy of Hiroshima was being written in the hospital wards by the children of the bomb. 10 years after the explosion, a young girl named Sadako Sasaki, who was just 2 years old when the sky turned white, was diagnosed with leukemia. Athletic and bright, Sadako faced her diagnosis with a quiet determination rooted in Japanese folklore. Legend said that anyone who folded 1,000 paper cranes would be granted a wish. So, from her hospital bed, using medicine wrappers and scraps of paper, she began to fold. She did not wish for revenge. She wished for life. Sadako passed away in 1955, having folded over 1,000 cranes. But her death ignited a movement that transcended borders. Today, the Children's Peace Monument in Hiroshima is draped in millions of colorful paper cranes sent by children from every corner of the globe. Sadako's story transformed the abstract horror of nuclear war into a tangible, fragile symbol of hope. Back in the United States, the triumph of technology quickly soured into a crisis of conscience for the men who had birthed the atomic age. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, watched with growing dread as his creation became the centerpiece of a global standoff. He famously told President Truman, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands," a sentiment that was met with dismissal by the political establishment. But Oppenheimer was not alone. The scientists who had raced to split the atom to defeat fascism now realized they had handed humanity the means of its own suicide. They created the doomsday clock, a symbolic clock face counting down the minutes to midnight representing global catastrophe. These scientists, once the heroes of the war effort, became the first activists of the nuclear age, warning that science without ethics is a path to extinction. Today, if you walk through Hiroshima, the scars of 1945 are hidden beneath a vibrant, bustling city of over 1 million people. Yet, the memory is preserved with a reverence that commands silence. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park stands on an island between the rivers, precisely where the busy commercial district once stood before it was vaporized. At the heart of the park burns the flame of peace. It is a fire that has burned continuously since 1964, and the city has vowed that it will not be extinguished until the day every nuclear weapon on Earth is dismantled. It is a promise of infinite patience. Every year on August 6th, the anniversary of the bombing, the city observes a moment of silence at 8:15 a.m., but the most poignant moment comes at dusk. In a ceremony known as Toro Nagashi, thousands of paper lanterns are lit and set afloat on the Motoyasu River, passing in front of the skeletal Jindaku Dome. Each lantern carries a message of peace or the name of a lost ancestor. As the river fills with these drifting lights, guiding the souls of the departed toward the ocean, the water that once ran red with blood now glows with a warm, golden light, a powerful testament that while humanity possesses the power to destroy, it also possesses a profound capacity to remember, to heal, and to hope. As we look back at the morning the modern world began, we are left to grapple with the dual nature of our progress. We have unlocked the secret to the atom, giving us both the power to power cities and the power to destroy them. The story of Hiroshima is a somber reminder that technology is a tool, and its impact depends entirely on the wisdom of the hands that wield it. It forces us to ask, have we learned the lessons of that Blue Monday morning, or are we destined to forget the heat of that terrible sun? If you found this exploration of history compelling, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more in-depth documentaries. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe the use of the atomic bomb was a necessary evil to end the war, or a moral line that should never have been crossed?